Welcome to another episode of I Know I'm Crazy with Naja Hall. Today, we're here with my hometown girl, Memphis, Tennessee. Stand up if you're anywhere in the building. Yunetta Spring Smith. Yunetta is a trauma therapist and an EMDR therapist. Now, I'm so curious about her realm of work because I love clinicians. You guys know we talk to a whole bunch of therapists here on the podcast. But EMDR is something that's always fascinated me. And to be quite frank, I'm ignorant about it. So at the same time, you guys are learning about it, as am I. She not only practices, but she trains others. She goes around the country, around the world at this point, training other therapists and clinicians on this life altering, life impacting practice. So, Yunetta, welcome to I Know I'm Crazy with Naja Hall.
Great to
Ooh,
be here.
hey girl, hey. So it's been a good minute. Let me just say, I'm so proud of you and all that you've accomplished. When I see somebody that is working in the realm of trauma therapy and helping individuals, groups, work organizations, civilizations to work themselves out of trauma in such a different way, I have a lot of questions, right? So, I want you to speak to me and us as if we are 5-year-olds. Because I literally, I know I've seen the practice. Like I've seen people on TikTok do the hand-eye movements, and I don't know if they're trained or not. She's going to teach us how to recognize if someone's actually a clinician or they just kind of watch the TikTok videos like I be doing. So, first and foremost, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yes. So nice to be here with you, my fellow Tennessean.
Hey, Memphis, stand up.
Yes. So I feel like I'm Memphis. I kind of connected with a lot of folks from Memphis and in school, undergraduate from Martin. But
you're not from. You're from Tennessee, not Memphis.
Not Memphis, Clarksville. So I'm right up over the way, but
down the street.
You know how it is. It is. Right down the street. So. So I've been, knew early on that I wanted to focus on psychology and knowing how the brain works, understand that how my family's crazy, everybody else is crazy.
That's what the podcast is called. I Know I'm Crazy.
Yep, because we all have something that we're navigating, but just wanting to understand more about how to heal. So, I worked as a therapist for a while, and in my work, I found that I was getting stuck with my clients, with cycles and stuff. And I was like, it's got to be more to it than this. I feel like we're making progress, and then they come back and it's like the same stuff a different day. Right. So one of my friends, that's what I call them, my therapist friends, asked me if I wanted to go to a training with her. She had a training in mind, and I didn't even know anything about EMDR. But when I tell you that training literally changed my life.
Change your life.
Yes. Things that I have known about my history and my trauma, things that we as Black folks, oftentimes minimize about our lived experiences. In that training, that was the very first time that my emotions and the experience linked up and connected.
Yeah, say that. You got to say that again. Yeah. That was the first time that your emotions and your experience connected. What does that mean?
So what that means is, I know, we probably can relate to having, talking about things that happened in our childhood and joking about it, or oh yeah, that happened. And, you talk to somebody else and they're like, oh my gosh, that was horrible. And you're like, yeah, it wasn't pleasant, but you don't feel the emotion, the appropriate emotion that's connected to that event.
In the moment, or once you're recollecting it?
Once you're recollecting it, or or there's no connection to the emotion from the moment either.
Okay, you guys, you're gonna have to paint a picture. What's an example?
Okay. So tell me something that maybe you have experienced, that maybe you have made light of, or talked about, and maybe somebody else was like, oh my goodness, that was awful, and for you it was just like,
God, everything. I come from a family of people that make jokes of serious emotions. My mama, at my auntie's, my great aunt, who was my godmother, at her funeral, I was born on her birthday. Mama, they call the family, the pastor, call all of the family. He's like, everybody that was in that hospital room on her last day, I want you all to come up here, because she requested they all sing this one song. And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, see, I'm laughing about it now, and it's traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to be there because I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And so was my mom, two aunties, maybe a cousin, and someone else. And they were singing this song, this gospel song. And I just, we were all emotional because we knew that was her favorite song. And my mom broke down crying, fell out on the ground, got up, and started running around the church.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, girl. And I remember in the moment laughing profusely, not understanding my mother was hurting bad, because she, we all love this lady big. So that's one example of, I thought, like, in my family, we get a big laugh out of every funeral in our family.
Yeah, absolutely. Every funeral has something
Every
funny.
funeral we have a major laugh.
I think it's there to help, because laughter is a stabilizer, and we could talk about that, and a lot of Black folks in our culture, that's what we do. Like, that's how we manage,
And I want to talk about other cultures
emotions
too, because how they manage, because I'm sure you see a lot of different people, but so that because everybody listens to this podcast, so that the white folks can understand how the Black folks are culturally, so that we as Black folks can understand how the Latinos and the Asians and the white folks. I do want to make some cultural connections, but it's so interesting that you said that.
Yeah, because everyone has a different way of kind of navigating grief.
Facts.
Facts. So that is very common in my lived experience, and I know in a lot of other lived experiences where laughter is there. But sometimes we can focus so much on the funny part of it that we don't connect with the pain and the grief and the sadness of it. So, as you tell that story over and over again, it's more so connected to the funny part than the painful part.
Absolutely.
So for me personally, in my experience, like with training, there was a situation where we had got chased by a dog. Okay. So my mom was a part of a religious organization that kind of goes from door to door and,
I think I know the name of that
talks
one.
to people. Yeah. So that was what she was a part of. And in the process of that, there was somebody had a dog, the dog got out and chased us, right? So I always told that story. Oh yeah, I vaguely remembered it, but it really didn't have a connection. I didn't have an emotional connection to it. But when I was doing EMDR, I felt the fear from the event, right? So I was able to conceptualize the fear. I was able to put pieces and parts of the memory together. And that issue, that incident actually connected with some other experiences that I had with dogs, other experiences that I had being afraid and having to kind of run or flee to be safe. And that was the first time that I had ever connected with the fear of that story. It was just kind of talked about or told as if it was just, just this
it was
thing
glanced
that
over.
happened.
It was just a thing but it stuck with you.
But
apparently.
It stuck with me. And it has stuck with me throughout my life, but I didn't recognize the emotions that don't get processed get stored. Right. And if we don't process them appropriately and let our body and our brain and our emotions know that danger isn't present anymore, then every time I experienced something similar, it went all the way back to that memory and I wasn't aware of it. So I had to reprocess that memory to kind of clear it out so that now, I used to be afraid of dogs. I didn't want to be bothered with a dog.
So that follows you all the way up into teenagehood, adulthood, the fear.
Yep,
emotions that don't get processed get stored. What does that mean? Are they in our cells? Is it, matriculates into stress, strokes, heart disease, cancer, all of these diseases?
All of that. All of that.
Break that down for us.
Yeah. So our emotions are designed to come up and be named and classified and processed so that we can move through, right? So imagine feeling some kind of intense pain and then you don't ever talk about it. You don't ever name it, right? You don't ever say that I was scared, I was sad, I was upset. If you don't ever address it or talk about it, then the body doesn't necessarily know what to do with what to do with it, right? So then it just kind of gets stuck, right? Kind of gets frozen. in our brain and literally in our body, because we can map out where emotions are kind of stored, physically in our body
Oh.
as well. So if you don't process them, then they just kind of get stored and they get stuck.
They manifest into they can sometimes have physical manifestations, is what you're
Yep.
saying.
Yep. Physical manifestations. Like if you notice you get this back pain a certain time, or you get this stress in your neck when you have a certain type of encounter. And then actually, they can manifest into disease, right? So then we have like, chronic disease. You get like diabetes, or you have hypertension, or you have fibromyalgia, or in Black women, fibroids and things like that is something that comes from unprocessed trauma. So the body is always trying to work to help you survive, right? And when we don't work with our body, then it kind of starts to work against us.
It's interesting that you say fibroids. I recently shared, and I was always a little ashamed. I don't know what caused such shame around it.
Mm-hmm.
As a woman, you have a uterus. A person that's born with a uterus, female identifying. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to get into the terminology, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had my seventh myomectomy
Mm-hmm.
a few months, about 6 months ago, and I was very open with sharing the healing journey. And I was like, "This is the last one." And I remember like around number 3 or 4, I'm like, "Why do they keep growing back?
Mm-hmm.
What has happened to me?" There was literally nothing in my memory that I can
Mm-hmm.
recall, like a specific trauma that happened. Had I made
Mm-hmm.
bad decisions with dumb partners as a kid?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, but there was never, any sort of trauma that I could directly identify. But I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I'm blaming myself. At one point, I even talked to my ancestors. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I said, hey, y'all, I understand that a lot of women, a lot of Black women were
Mm-hmm.
forced to give birth. And I was like, I know I don't want to freak any of y'all out at this point. So if
Mm-hmm.
I'm freaking y'all out, just fast forward past this part.
Mm-hmm. It's
But
okay.
I was like, I know a lot of Black women were sent to birthing farms. My heritage, as far as I've been able to trace back, was from a plantation in South
Mm-hmm.
Carolina. And the women that I can trace as far back, I saw one of them had 12 babies.
Mm.
She got to breastfeed them, and they were ripped and sold to different parts of the country.
Wow.
So I was like, I wonder, did our ancestors bind up our wombs and give us
Mm.
like this natural birth control to say no women in my lineage would have to
Mm.
suffer this, and so let's close it up. And there's all these thoughts I had, like, what in the world is this to blame? So it's interesting, and I've always thought that fibroids, especially, were some sort
Mm-hmm.
of matriculation of some sort of manifestation of
Mm-hmm.
some sort of mind body connection. You kind of just confirmed it, so I wish I could
Mm-hmm.
find what my
Yeah.
source is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's deep. That's deep. Because every generation, it's funny you mention that, because we know epigenetics, right,
Yes,
is a
yes.
thing,
And
right?
explain for people that don't
Mm-hmm.
understand or don't know what epigenetics is. Can you just
Mm-hmm.
explain what that is?
Yeah, yeah. So epigenetics is kind of like the markers that we pass down generationally, right? I would say that we are wired to survive, right? We evolve and change to survive. So if a generation experiences something that compromises their survival, not only do we pass down behaviors culturally, or stories throughout throughout generations,
Yeah.
the body also holds certain encodes certain information into your DNA that says, watch out for this, look out for this,
One of my
this is an
favorite books is
issue.
The Body Keeps the Score. Like,
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
Absolutely. And that's literally what the body holds: everything. It not only holds your lived experience, it holds generations of lived experiences, right? We're still finding out information of how far back it goes. But to say, it kind of connected, like if you grew up in church or whatever, it's like your children and your children's children,
Yes, those
will be
generational
blessed
curses, as we
or be
call them.
cursed, right?
Yes.
But knowing that at one point your grandmother, which is holding your mother, and your mother is also holding you at the same time. So the experiences of your grandmother, if we just take it, 3 generations in, the experiences that your grandmother had were passed down to your mother, and you also experienced those as well. right? So if
Yeah.
there was something that was going to compromise your safety, then that information is stored differently than anything else, because the way that we're wired to survive. So anything that's going to compromise our safety, it almost gets highlighted in our system. Now you read a book and you got a whole bunch of stories and a whole bunch of information, but we have to highlight this. This is important.
This compromises my survival. So
Yeah.
let me store this. And
Mm-hmm.
in turn, it's going to be passed down to my sons and daughters and their sons and daughters and theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it was using the dog example.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd never dealt with your fear
Mm-hmm.
of dogs and connected that emotion, um, is that something that would have been stored and could have possibly, like, your offspring could have been born with this innate, maybe even irrational fear of dogs? Like, I don't know where that came from.
Of animal, possibly. Yep, it could have, if it was strong enough, to create some, because the intensity of it makes a difference as well.
Oh,
So for me, it was like, it was something that happened that I was afraid of. I was always like, a little afraid of dogs. I got chased by dogs and stuff, right?
yeah.
But it wasn't like extreme until well, when my daughter came, she was probably around 8. She asked for a dog, so I was like, I don't know.
You're
But
like,
she
I
wants
don't
a
fool with
dog. I don't fool with
dogs.
dogs like that. We ain't never had dog. We ain't never
We
been dog.
never had dogs.
Right. But because she wanted one, and she, so, she got a dog, and I was able to see it grow up. So, I was comfortable around my dog. So what brought that memory back for me was one day I was walking my dog, and my dog got attacked by another dog.
Oh,
So that stored memory that was just there got activated when that happened in my present. So if it
okay.
got so bad that I didn't want to walk, I didn't want to exercise, like anything that caused me to like lose my breath, it felt like I was basically gonna
You
die.
associated, your body associated that with that fear.
Yep. And that old memory came right back after that incident. So when I went to the training, I went to process that. It's like, they say pick something that's, recent that just happened. And I was like, oh, I just had this issue where, my dog got attacked. So I'll use that. And when I used that, it went
You drill down
all the way
to be
back to
like,
that other memory. Yeah. And
okay.
all sorts of other connections kind of came up from that too. But one thing I always say is like trauma freezes our memories and our triggers unthaw them.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
See, we got, that's gonna be a sound bite, so you gonna have to say that all over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So trauma, when we experience something traumatic, that memory gets frozen, right? And then when we experience something presently and we get triggered, that old memory that was just on ice gets unthawed. So now that past, you're not just dealing with the present stressor. You're dealing with everything that you've experienced, sometimes everything that your mama and your grandmama experienced that's connected to that. It all comes rushing in.
Whew. So this is a lot, and the fix,
Okay.
because I want to talk about, we're solution based here,
Mm-hmm.
and I love what you said. Trauma freezes your memory, but triggers unthought.
Mm-hmm.
But that means it's never melting completely. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's just gonna get frozen again. You're gonna be triggered again, and it's unthought. So that means you're gonna have all these constant actions and reactions, and it's gonna be a cycle until
Mm-hmm.
something finally allows it to dissipate. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm assuming this is where EMDR
Mm-hmm.
comes in. What was it about this? Because I'm sure you've been to all sorts of training. There's all sorts of pseudosciences that people try to pass off to you as
Mm-hmm.
clinically proven, and there's all these new ways of doing things. But what was it that made you say, "Oh, I can stand behind this,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to spread the word about this particular thing."
Yeah, yeah. So despite the fact that it's been around forever and there's tons of research,
Now, how long has it
supporting
been
it.
around?
So it's been around, I say forever, but it's not that long. Like late 80s, early 90s. So around that time frame.
Okay, over
Francine
30
Shapiro.
years.
Yeah. So she discovered it, developed it on her own. Francine Shapiro was the founder of EMDR and then started testing it out with veterans. and using it for them and their trauma. And what she found is when you get into the what makes it different, or how do we continue to stay in this cycle of having a trigger and then bringing it back, and then I'm freezing it, I'm taking it out, thawing it out, right? What happens is when you unthaw a memory, and you do so in an environment that's different from when the memory occurred. So, say for instance, when this happened, I was in an environment that wasn't safe, or I was in, uh, around people who weren't supportive, right? Then that's why the memory was stored in the manner that it was. But when you
Okay.
bring it up in a space that feels secure and safe, with a person that feels supportive, and you really get to the core of not just what happened, but what do you believe about yourself because that happened, and
Oh,
identify that, um, and then identify what would you like to believe about yourself, despite this incident. Then when we bring that memory up, we can it's malleable, and we can shift it. So we don't change what happens, but we change your interpretation of what happens. We
okay.
change what you believe about yourself because that happened. And
Mm.
and once that shifts, then the emotional charge, or the fear, or the stress around the memory, it no longer exists. And then once we kind of restore that memory, then you can store it, and it's no longer perceived in your system as a threat.
It's not a trigger anymore.
It's not a trigger anymore.
It gets to rest. It gets
Yep.
to become a memory.
A memory, something in the past. And that's another thing about trauma. Trauma does not recognize time and space. So it doesn't understand that that was then and this is now. And that's a really big part of trauma healing and trauma work, is when we bring those memories up presently, the body reacts and responds as if it did when it happened. So it literally feels like it's happening again.
The
Um,
tightness in the chest, the
mhm.
breaking out in sweats, the hives. It's like it feels recent.
Yeah, it's here. It's now. It's real. So that's a part of the work that we do when you desensitize, right? So we use the eye movements, or tapping, or bilateral stimulation, or dual attention stimulation. There's various ways we could do it. We use that to activate the memory and tax the working memory, and then we desensitize. So we take the charge off the memory.
Okay.
Hmm.
How in the heck this Francine Shapiro, and she's working with veterans who, we know the term PTSD. I think they called it
Hmm.
shell shock
Hmm.
before. Like I've seen the videos. I've seen what these young boys that went off to war to serve their countries, and they
Hmm.
came back literally dissociated from reality, looking
Hmm.
physically different and torn. They were gone a year, but they look like they'd aged 20 years
Hmm.
just from the sheer stress. How does one happen upon these techniques to be like, hey, let me just tell somebody to move their eyeballs and then they're better? And I know I just oversimplified it, but how the heck did she come up with that?
Yeah,
What was
yeah.
sis doing?
Yeah. So a lot of it came from her research around. She had a bout of cancer, so she was really looking into, like, how do we naturally heal, like studying cultures and various things, and like bringing in different components of different activities and things that people do.
Yeah.
So in her one day, she was dealing with something. It's like this famous walk in the park that she took. She was dealing with some stuff, and she went for a walk, which walking is bilateral stimulation, right? Dual attention, bilateral stimulation. So she went for a walk, and she noticed that as she was thinking about something upsetting and distressing, that her eyes, like, she just started kind of looking back and forth, and she noticed that she felt the charge on whatever it was that she was dealing with didn't feel as activated. And
While she was triggered.
while she was triggered,
Okay.
so she was able to like process through it, where she was like, that doesn't feel like it's bothersome anymore, like it was when I started. So she continued to look it up and pull in research, kind of paired it with REM sleep. So, when we sleep, our eyes dart back and forth. So I call
Mm-hmm.
REM sleep the equivalent of like taking out the mental trash. So when
Mm.
you fall asleep, our body naturally
These
has a
eyeballs are
way.
going and going and
They
going.
going back and forth. That's our body's natural way. Like, we're naturally wired to heal, right? So that's our
Mm.
body's natural way of processing stuff and taking things. You know, you go to sleep, you wake up, you feel better. You go to sleep, you wake up, you got a solution to whatever it was that you were bothered by,
Mm.
right?
We've
So
been
that's
processing
we've been
all
processing since the beginning of
subconsciously
time.
while we sleep.
Yeah, yeah. So she kind of put those things together with the research she had, and she tested it out, you know? So she was like, I'm going to get some people to like bring up some distressing memories. We're going to try the eye movements and then check back in with the memory and see, does it change? And in her case study, what she found is that the people who did eye movements, the distress that they had was like maybe up to a 9 to a 10, because we use a SUD scale, like the subjective unit of disturbance. So
Mm-hmm.
their distress was like a 9 or 10, but then after doing the eye movements, it came down to like 0 or 2. And then
Huh.
the other group that just sat and thought about whatever it was that was bothering them
They're
without eye
probably super
movements,
high.
they still stayed at the same level or they went up a little bit, right? So
Mm-hmm.
she, continued to research that. So what we do with EMDR is we check the distress, we reduce the distress, but then we also shift over to what we call the positive or adaptive. So say for instance, in this situation that happened, I felt like I wasn't good enough, right? Then we will process the event that caused you to feel that way, reduce the distress.
How are you
And
processing the event? Is it
so
talking through it?
so it's a bilateral. So we bring up that distressing event and we measure like how distressing it is. And then
Mm-hmm.
we use the bilateral stimulation to process through it. So
And
processing
her
is,
bilateral was walking. So what are you doing in the realm of an
mhm.
office with a person?
Yeah, so her bilateral was the walking, but then it was also the eye movements, because she noticed that while she was thinking about it, that her eyes and processing it, her eyes were moving quickly back and
Ah,
forth. Uh-huh.
okay.
So yeah, so in a session, we would set that up and we would identify
Um,
the distress, the trigger, the incident. We would measure how intense it is
how do
for
you
you.
measure the intensity?
So just asking the client, like on a scale of 0 to 10, when you think about that event, how distressing does it feel to you as you think about it?
Let me think about. Gosh, I wish I had an event on hand that I could think about that we could show people what it looked like.
Hmm. Well, see, that's the thing too, because it is EMDR is it's a therapy, so it's a whole framework around it. So we don't just go pulling up events and moving our eyes and getting
You're gonna be like,
better.
"Hey, girl, movie." Okay,
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
like
So,
an example of what it would look like. So
hmm
give me an example of what that would look like, and you're gonna have to be the client and the therapist. So that people watching this, because I know some of you guys are listening on iTunes and Spotify and all the places,
hmm
but if you are watching us on YouTube or you're seeing this on socials, then I do want to show what an example of it is, because I've seen some videos on social media.
hmm
They weren't from clinicians though, so
Oh,
it can get
really?
kind of, yeah. So it can get, because there's people that do EMDR coaching
Mm.
that teach coaches how to do it. And
Wow.
yeah. And so I have thoughts about that, and I'm sure they're really good at what they do. But that's not. I just want on
Yeah.
this podcast. I like people to be extremely informed, so that
hmm
when they see these resources as they're scrolling or listening, they can know the source of the resource,
hmm
and they
Yeah,
can
for sure.
know where to put their faith, because there's so
hmm
much information. There's so many people that really look like they know what they're doing, and they sound like they know what they're talking about.
hmm
But a lot of people are getting led astray.
Yeah, yeah. And you have to
Yeah.
be really careful, with that, with EMDR, because if you aren't skilled, trained, and really know what you're doing, you can really cause somebody to what we call um, dissociate, get out of their what we call a window of tolerance, get super activated, and they don't know how to like contain and close that out.
So they could
So,
stay there. You could
and
send them to
yeah,
La La Land, and you don't know how to get them
and you
back.
don't know how to get them back. So it's really important to make sure that, if you're working with somebody, that they have some kind of EMDRIA approved. So EMDRIA is the International Association that governs EMDR clinicians.
Mm.
So, asking like, oh, who were you trained with or where were you trained, and making sure that it's a reputable source, because you just can't, just
And
go out
this, you are
here.
not offending anybody by asking them where they were trained
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
asking them for their credentials. I notice that the people that get offended by that are the ones who are kind of questionable. But
Hmm.
most people are going to be very happy to show you and to provide you their licensure and just be like, oh, yeah, I want you to be fully confident before you work with me. There's a
Hmm.
lot of
Yeah.
snake oil salespeople out here. So
Yeah, for sure.
EMDR means what's the M? What's the D mean? What does that
Uh,
mean?
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Eye
Hmm.
movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Right, right.
And the whole process is taking a trauma
Hmm.
and allowing the person through talk therapy.
So through no, not it's not talk. It's really very subcortically, what we call, it's a body based therapy. So we're not necessarily talking. So if you see a EMDR session and they're just like talking and talking and talking throughout, it's really not a lot of talk happening in most cases. Sometimes you got
Mm-hmm.
to talk a little bit to put things together, but it's really taking that person on a journey of pulling up the memory and doing the dual attention stimulation, bilateral stimulation. So it could be eye movements, it could be
Mm.
tapping, so you could do rapid tapping, or patting your knees or walk. So it's various ways of doing that. You can have like buzzers in your hands or light bars, various different ways of doing it. But you bring up the memory and you're just asking like what they notice in between. They just tell you what they notice and then you're having them go with it. So the brain knows where it needs to go to heal, so we're
Mm.
just kind of following the natural system of what seems significant, what feels charged, what part is stuck for the client to help them navigate through that memory so that we could take the charge off of it. And then once we desensitize, then we install the adaptive or the positive. So it's the solution to the trauma. So trauma is not just what happens to us, it's what happens after that thing happened to us,
Mm. Okay.
right? So that determines if something is going to get stored as trauma, right? So if when you were a child, you fell and your parents said, "Oh my goodness, are you okay? Come here, let me see. Let me clean it off. You okay? Make sure you're good, give you a hug, and then you stabilize and you're fine." The body knows how to recover, right?
Right.
But if you're a child and you fall and injure yourself and hurt yourself, and your parent says, "Now I told your ass not to be out there. What did you do?" And they
That's a trauma.
respond in a way that causes you, now I'm injured and I'm, not supported, then that gets kind of stored in your system in a different way, right? So it allows us to bring up what could have happened, maybe what should have happened after that trauma, so
Ah.
that the system can resolve and know, okay, it's not a threat anymore.
It wasn't my fault that my parent did not support me. I felt humiliated, but it's not because I was a bad person. They just
Mm-hmm.
did not support me. And so it's the process of, so would a client come in saying, hey, I need to, I fell when I was younger and I got yelled at. I
Yeah.
want, I want to fix this. Are they coming in like identifying this laundry list of
No, no, no,
traumas?
no, no, not at all. Not at all. It takes a while to get there sometimes, right? They're coming in saying, I got a lot of anxiety at work and I feel like I'm not doing enough, or I can't get it right, right? And when you get to the core of their anxiety, maybe that anxiety is wrapped around feeling like they failed in some way or they did something wrong. And as
Mhm.
we do that work of EMDR, tracing it back, then we find, the origin of it. And oftentimes there is childhood, you know?
It's something that is just buried so deeply that they just learn to glance over or probably turn
Mm-hmm.
into a funny, some sort of funny, or
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm
Just like,
okay.
oh yeah, I fell and everybody laughed at me and it wasn't a big deal. Right.
Who are
But
the best candidates for this type of
uh-huh.
therapy?
Everybody, listen, anybody that is having challenges navigating present situations and not really understanding what this is, right? So a lot of the research comes around like PTSD, but we can use EMDR for everything: anxiety, depression, any type of clinical diagnosis for the most part. It is how your body has learned to navigate life to survive, right? So one of the cornerstones of EMDR is like AIP. So when I train this stuff, I always say, "You down with AIP?" And then everybody say, "Yeah, you know,
Yeah, you know
right?"
me, and I don't know what AIP means, but
Right.
what is AIP?
Right. So AIP is our adaptive information processing system, right? So this is the cornerstone of like the foundation of EMDR. But what AIP kind of signifies is we all are kind of wired to heal. Our body naturally is trying to survive to see another day and heal. So AIP, the equivalent of AIP would be if you were to cut yourself, you don't have to
The
tell your
scab
body.
with it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen automatically, right? You bleed, you scab, it falls off. That's our body's natural way of processing things and healing. If you cut yourself deep, you know, you might have to go get some additional support because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just going to be able to heal on its own.
Right.
So we're wired naturally to get over little small insignificant things. But if they continue to happen over and over and over and over again, right? You continue to wear in this one area, it's going to create a challenge and problem. Or if it's very deeply rooted, right? It's very severe and there's no repair that comes for that emotional wound, then we got to go back in and reprocess that thing. Otherwise, it's going to continue to reoccur, right? So
It's gonna
what
freeze, it's
AI,
gonna unthaw, freeze, unthaw,
mm-hmm,
freeze. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So AIP is just our natural gravitation towards healing. The tricky
Mm.
part about it is how we learn to survive may not be what we need to thrive.
Oh.
Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and I know I'm throwing around a whole bunch of examples,
No, this
but
is
that's just how
good.
my
This is
brain
good.
works,
We
right?
love examples over here on
Mm-hmm.
this podcast.
So oftentimes, what we needed to survive is not what's going to be necessary for us to thrive, right? So,
What we needed to survive is
mm-hmm.
not going to serve us when we're trying to thrive.
Yes,
Meaning,
maybe.
I learned this thing to protect
Mm-hmm.
myself. I
Mm-hmm.
learned I need to be fearful of dogs because they're harmful. They're going to chase me. They're going to bite me.
Mm-hmm.
But my kids want a dog now, and my whole neighborhood, everybody has a dog. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
thrive because every time I walk outside, I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling anxious.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not
Yeah,
thriving in my environment anymore with this particular survival skill.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's no longer serving me, right? It helped me survive in the past, but presently it's creating a hindrance for me. It's no longer serving me, you know? So that's usually when folks come to the office for therapy, they're realizing and they're upset and frustrated and can't figure it out because they're like, I've done this my whole life. Like, this is how I've navigated the world. But they don't realize because trauma gets kind of stored with that. They don't understand. Like, you look at your world now, like your world now doesn't look like your world looked then.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't use those tools now, you know? So now it's creating issues in your relationship because you're used to being independent and taking care of yourself, right? Because you had to.
But
But
now
now
you
you're
have a
trying to be,
partner that wants to help
mm-hmm,
and wants to take the responsibility, but
you're like,
you cannot
uh-uh,
allow that,
you can't allow it. And your
or you're going to
sis,
lose a relationship
you're going to lose a
over and over. It's going to be a
relationship.
cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, giving people grace, it's not that they are trying to be difficult. It's literally their nervous system has encoded this as life or death.
Ooh.
So it
Oof.
feels like I'm going to die if I let you take care of me.
If I don't fight you back, if I let you get close, if I let you show me that I'm wrong,
Yes,
I am going to implode. I will cease to exist.
exactly. That's how it reads in the nervous system.
Which is why we see people that are unable to regulate their emotions, or
Mm-hmm.
they resort to violence, or
Mm-hmm.
have this cycle of broken relationships because
Mm-hmm.
this is how they've learned to survive.
This is how they learn to survive.
And it
Yep.
sounds like they would be the only ones to be like, wait a minute, people keep dumping me. I can't keep a man. I can't keep a woman. I keep
Mm-hmm.
getting fired from these jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Maybe I'm the issue, and then I need to come see somebody
Mm-hmm.
like you to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do we couple EMDR? Oh my God, I
Mm-hmm.
can't believe it. Do we couple it with talk therapy, or is this two different types of
Mm-hmm.
clinicians that are doing two different things?
Yeah, so there is a integration that happens with EMDR. So it's not just I'm waving my hands in front of your face and we tap in and tap in,
Yeah.
right? There's 8 phases. We bounce it all around, girl, but it's
That's
okay.
perfect. That's what
So
we do on this podcast because they know this is a springboard for them to go and do their own research. But this is
right.
so good though.
Uh-huh. I'm glad it's helpful.
Oh
So
yeah.
there are 8 phases to EMDR, right? So the first phase is history, right? And we may get that history first, or the second phase you mentioned them people being activated, right? Or just popping off. The second phase is preparation or resourcing. And in that phase, we teach people how to move from activation to stabilization. So maybe you never got the tools to understand how to breathe or how to orient yourself into the present moment, right? Or not to be very activated. So we kind of teach them what they need to be able to address the traumatic issue, right?
Mm.
So we don't go into the trauma until we properly resource our client so that they have everything they need. So if you didn't have protection or nurturing, if you don't know what an emotion is or how to name or recognize your emotions, if you have no connection with your body and what it means when you get a heaviness in your chest or tightness in your stomach, if you have no point of reference for that, then we're going to work on that first.
Okay. Okay.
So if you have somebody that hasn't had a good experience with EMDR, most of the time it's because they didn't have somebody to really help them walk through that preparation phase,
Mm.
right? So
You're
then
not just going to jump into the
you're not just going to
tap,
jump
tap,
into it.
tap and eye
No.
movements.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because then
So
you
you're going
bringing
to teach us
something
about the
up.
safe space.
You
Right.
bringing something up, you don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have the skills to know what to do with that memory if you
So you're
don't work on
teaching
it
me
first.
beforehand, before we even activate this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, okay, when we take this out of the drawer, this is how we're going to fold it, and this is how we're going to place it
Mm-hmm.
away
Mm-hmm.
carefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
So
like,
that's where some of the talk kind of comes
okay,
in that
okay.
teaching, preparation, the history of understanding how you arrived in this space. So when we look at like AIP and history, I'm looking at what did you have to do to survive? To be here right now, what did you have to do?
Mm.
Right? Did you have
And your
to?
client is going to tell you, I had to A, B, and C. I had to
Mm-hmm.
do these things.
Yeah, I had to be silenced. I had to be small. Maybe I had to be independent. I had to be loud and bold or, aggressive to be able to
Mm.
survive. So, what did you have to do to survive your environment? And how is that impacting you now?
Mm. What did I have to do to survive? And how does it impact me now? How does it serve me now?
Mm-hmm.
Or stifle me
Yep,
now?
either one. Because it can be of service to you, right? Everything we experience is not bad. There's
Mm-hmm.
some things that we had to learn through our lived experience that we can utilize, but it's recognizing it's not the what, it's the when. So when do I need to turn this on?
Yeah.
And when is it not necessary? And that's the part that comes with wisdom and with preparation and being able to be present to see what tool do I use now for this moment.
Wow. I 100% am going to go and do some EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
I want to find someone here in the city to do that. So,
Yeah.
for anyone that's on the fence or
Uh-huh.
thinking, because from what you from what you said, it really does sound like human beings that have had a traumatic experience,
Mm-hmm.
big or small, or they can't identify what that trauma was, but they still
Mm-hmm.
feel they know they're stuck, would
Mm-hmm.
be a great candidate.
Absolutely.
What could you say to the people that have heard this entire podcast and that are
Mm-hmm.
still on the fence, like, oh, I don't know if I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that's for me. What could you say to those
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. What I would say is, if you're on the fence, like get what you need. I'm not about pushing anybody. I feel like we're open when we feel stable and secure and when we feel like, knowledgeable. So I'm always informing my clients. But one thing I'll say is like you really owe it to yourself Like if you have made it through everything you've been through in your life, you owe it to yourself to be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So
Mm.
it makes no sense to go through everything you've been through and still live a life of anxiety and torment and, hypervigilance, or not trusting yourself, like not being able to live like the fullness of your life. So that's what I would say. Like you owe it to yourself. If you made it out of that situation or out of that predicament, why not enjoy the life that you have now, like
Wow.
fully?
Wow. Why not
Hmm.
enjoy it? Why not these very few years that we're given here in this
Hmm.
physical experience in this life? You want to spend it just surviving and getting by?
Hmm.
Or do you want to thrive?
Yeah. Do you want to
I
thrive?
think we all want to thrive. I would really
Hmm.
like to think that, especially people who listen to this podcast. Wow, Yunetta, can you tell everybody where to find you? Do you? I mean, I feel like if you don't have a book, if you have one, I'm buying it. But if you don't, can you start writing it so I can buy it? I'll pay now. Can you just tell everybody where to find you and those and where you practice for
Hmm.
those that are local to where you are? How can we get in touch?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm all over social media at Yunetta Spring Smith, mostly on social. My website is yunettaspring.com. You can find my practice stuff, my EMDR stuff, my speaking stuff, all on there. And then you can also, so one thing I created was a directory. So that is for you, like saying, man, I want to find somebody in New York or somebody where I am.
Oh
I have a
wow!
directory with it's BIPOC EMDR therapists because we are one of the maybe underrepresented people within the EMDR community. So I'm
Uh-huh.
working to, let us know
That's good.
that it's okay to go, to a
Mm-hmm.
culturally informed, humble, culturally centered therapist, because
Yeah.
that piece of connection and
It
relatability
can be
and
important when you're
understanding.
talking about dark spaces. The
Exactly.
last thing you want to do is feel a disconnect with your
Mm-hmm.
clinician.
Yeah. So I help all clinicians become more culturally informed so that you can reach all your clients. So you
Mm.
can find me the directory if you're looking for somebody. And then one
And
of
I will
my,
share the link, by the way, you all. The link will be shared in the description, so you can just
mm-hmm,
go right to it.
yeah, cool. And one of my passions now is I've seen some great work with my clients, and I'm like, okay, I want to be able to equip therapists to be able to like really understand EMDR, feel competent and confident to be able to, administer it with their clients or utilize it with their clients. So now I'm training. So I offer EMDR trainings through EMDR consulting, and all on my website you can find those. So if you're a therapist somewhere and you're interested, holla at me. I'm
Yes,
open to train you in EMDR. I'm helping folks get trained, certified, and become consultants where they can help other therapists.
that's beautiful.
So powerful. And I wish I had it sooner in my career. But
Mm.
once I got it,
You
that's
got
it.
it now. Hey, if
Yep.
you don't know, now you
Now you
know.
know.
You know.
Yep. And
Thank you.
I do have a book. Not my book. I'm working on my book now. But
Okay,
I
what's the
do
book
have
you got?
a
What's the book?
workbook.
Not the book. What's the book?
The workbook I have is Take the Struggle Out of Self-Care. So it is 6 weeks to creating your self care strategy. It's on Amazon. So this is for people who are just getting started. And if you want to identify like what's getting in your way, I feel like the nervous system is super important. So if we can help people regulate their nervous system, then they can make better informed decisions. They can have better relationships. They can have more self awareness. So it's just like a self discovery workbook to help you
And
improve
that's
and
for
enhance.
anybody. That's for all of us,
Anybody,
right? Where do we
anybody can
find
use
it?
it. I have it on my site and on Amazon. It's called Take the Struggle Out of Self Care.
Okay. And we
Mm-hmm.
love it. We love it. Yunetta Spring Smith, everybody, let's give her a round of applause. We learned so much. I learned so much today, and I hope that you guys did too. Yunetta, thank you so much for
Thank
joining us.
you.
And I'm pretty sure that we're going to get a million calls for you to come back. You
Mm-hmm.
all, I'm going to tag all of her links below. So please, as I always ask you to do, we want to go spam her with love, comments, and likes, and let her know that you heard her over on I Know I'm Crazy with Naja Hall. And I will see you every other Tuesday,
Okay.
everywhere that you get your podcast. I'll see y'all next time. I'm going to leave you with this little adage today. Of all the things to keep in this world, keep it real. And be sure to like, tune in, subscribe, share, and follow. And definitely comment, because I'm trying to beat this algorithm. I'll see you all next time. And thank you so much for joining us. I know I'm crazy with Naja Hall. I know I'm crazy. I know I'm crazy. I know I'm crazy. I know I'm crazy. Naja Hall.